Welcome back to a snippet called In the Chute. Kalen asks a question, I come up with some brilliant answer, and you get to marvel at the info. What do you got, Kalen?
Well, a lot of times we'll talk about how much we take care of our own horses. We don't really, contract out or do any sort of, oftentimes we don't really purchase any care for our horses. And that includes trimming or shoeing the horses themselves. Not only is it a good training opportunity for us, it also helps kind of broaden the horse, so to speak, so that they, can work better with their purchasers eventually. But what's the difference between shoeing and trimming? Why do we do it? What are the different things that we take into effect? And what is the oftentimes the method that we follow that people may or may not always follow as well when it comes to us trimming the feet on the horses?
Well,
It's a lot there.
trimming, yeah, it's a ton. Shoeing and trimming on horses, there are, different schools of thought on it, different associations that follow certain things. They don't always, exactly align with all of the others. So it's it's one of those things where, I think largely it's whatever you grew up doing, what you were taught. Sometimes you'll have some converts to one side or the other. But your comment about, you know, doing our own stuff with everything includes like the veterinary work, most of that
Right.
that we can do. In fact, as I got a call yesterday from a guy asked if we had some sedative for horses. It's like, well, I don't know. And he had an animal that had some wire wrapped around him. He a little bit wild. He needed to kind of calm it down so that they could safely undo it. So, when you become a resource for somebody else, I mean, I had to send him to somebody else, and I thought maybe might, I don't know, but so along with that, people are calling about what's the best way to shoe or trim, and so I give them what I think is best, and based on the natural foot anatomy of the horse. That's what I think has worked best. And that's kind of backed up with when you turn a horse loose in in our part of the country, and those hooves stay trimmed on their own, not broken off, but they stay wore down because of our soils. We got pretty sandy soil here. It's not like desert, but it's hard soil. It's compacted, but it's got a lot of sand and a lot of grit to it. So those horses wear their feet down, and some horses you just don't even have to touch them. I mean, they just naturally wear their feet down. And when that's a pattern like that, you kind of want to pay attention to it and try to duplicate that
Yeah, the
for
the
your,
nature's way, so to speak.
yeah,
Like how's
yeah,
how's Mother
exactly.
Nature kind of doing it on its own?
Yeah. Without the breaking and that kind of stuff. And only because we don't have a lot of rock here. I mean, we do, but not like it's,
Like up in the
the
mountains where there's
foothills of the
boulders and
mountains.
stuff.
Yeah, not a lot, and there's no granite here. We got some limestone deep underneath, but most of this is all sand, sandy soil, sandstone type of materials. So they wear instead of break, and they will break. You do have those occasionally that will grow out a little bit more. And if they're protected or they can't move around a lot, then yeah, they can break out. And by that I mean if you've got them confined into a smaller pasture, um, working a horse up close, and they don't have a lot of ability to get out into the larger pastures, then they don't wear quite like you would normally expect. So matching what they can do for themselves is probably a pretty good idea. And it's worked for us. We've actually taken some horses that were lame. Um, we get some maladies in our horses, and this one happened to be ring bone, which is essentially arthritis in the pastern area. And we tried a lot of different things. Dad did a bunch of work with this horse trying to get her to come around, and she was a dominant member of the herd, and nothing was working, and she was slipping further and further down to where she really wasn't. She was kind of the bottom of the totem pole. And then I started trimming her. Went to a couple clinics, saw some ways, and I thought, man, this makes sense, and it really mirrored what was going on with our horses. So it really got my attention, and I started trimming her in that manner. And within 6 months or so, she was back at the top of the herd, and you couldn't tell that she was lame on that foot. Obviously, it didn't make the arthritis go away, but it made that foot work to where it was more natural and didn't, have some outgrowth because she was limping on it or not putting pressure on it. So, when you have things like that with that kind of a method of shoeing, that's perfect. Now, just even, or that was really trimming. It wasn't shoeing. I just trimmed that horse. And I think that's the important part. And I think most farriers, and I'm no farrier, don't get me wrong, but most farriers will probably agree that the trim is the most important part. Now you can fix some things by trimming and then putting certain kinds of shoes on, padded shoes, some toes or clip toes, just a lot of different things that you can do to marry the hind portions of that shoe together so it doesn't flex. It supports the bottom of the heel bulbs, all kinds of things that they can do to fix some issues. But trimming is important. The shoeing itself, you got a difference between a hot shoe and cold shoe, meaning, you trim that foot and then you heat that shoe up and then you place it on the bottom of that foot and you just kind of heat the bottom of that foot. Essentially is what they're doing. It gets a really good fit to that shoe. It custom fits and kind of melts into, for the want of a better word, onto that bottom of that hoof surface. We'll harden it somewhat too. Others do a cold shoe, and we tend to just cold shoe our horses. The type of shoe you use, whether it's heel and toe, rim shoes, plate shoes. There's all kinds of stuff. We got natural balance shoes. There's a whole variety and great differences in those philosophies and what you do with them. Aluminum shoes. You sure wouldn't put a heel and toe shoe on a horse that's going to be running a Kentucky Derby, but they'll put on some light aluminum shoes. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's part of that is all what your purpose is too. In the mountains, I've used heel and toes to get them up off the rock. But at the same time, when you do that, if you've got a lot of shale or some, not necessarily shale, but a lot of slabs of granite, then you've only got a couple of points of contact on that foot. So just a flat plate shoe gives you more contact with that rock. So, less slippage. It just depends on what you're going to do with it, what you need.
And when is it? Because like if anybody's asking or wondering, like what do we normally do? I'll say like to echo what you already explained, we don't really normally trim that often, but on occasion, if we feel the need because we see the growth or something like that, we will trim the horses and essentially it's like cutting off the fingernails in regards to, humans. It's just taking the hoof and kind of cutting it back and making it back to where it's kind of more trimmed up. But then on occasion we will apply shoes to the horses. And what is typically the driving factor, the driving force behind why we will put shoes on horses rather than just trim them and leave them be like we have been doing?
Yeah, good question. Normally, when we're working around here, we don't have a lot of the gravel type or sharp rock like in the foothills of the mountains, and our horses' feet get hard. And trimmed well, leave them alone. You're gonna, even if you're riding them a lot, but you're not riding them on surfaces that are going to cause them any kind of tenderness, then leave them alone. But if we're going to go for even, and I've done this even for a weekend in the mountains, I'm going to put shoes on those horses. I'm going to at least do their front shoes. If it's a day, I may do that depending on the territory you're going on, the trail that I may or may not know. If I don't know it, I'll try to research a little bit, and if there's a lot of rock on it, I'll put shoes on those horses. It's not cheap to do it, but it's a whole lot cheaper when you can do it yourself. You got to do it right, because just because you're trying to do it cheaper doesn't mean if you're doing it right, you're not going to cause problems with that horse. So getting some schooling on it is important. And of course, different schools will say that the other schools of thought are wrong. They're charlatans and they're going to ruin horses. And it's funny, horseshoers, I've seen so many of them where you're around them a little bit and they'll pick up a horse's foot, or you've got clients that have somebody who's put some shoes on a horse, or they're changing or wanting to know another person because somebody's moved. And I don't know, maybe it's the same way with doctors and mechanics. They'll pick a foot up and go, well, that guy didn't know what he was doing. So there's a lot of professional jealousy there. And I think maybe part of that's just trying to build a clientele and keep somebody, calling you back,
Sure.
because you do a good job. It's just like that. It's funny, but it's the need of the horse. Keep that horse sound, keep them so they're not hurting, they're not tender. Doesn't hurt them to put these shoes on, provided you do it right. You sure can. Just like you said, if you clip your fingernails too short and you quick yourself, you can do the same thing with a horse. You can trim them
Right.
and drive a nail, too close into the center of the hoof, get inside that white line, and it's formed as a kind of a structure. Then yeah, you can cause some problems, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's us with trimming horses' feet and chewing them when we need to. So with that, we'll take that conversation and put it out to pasture.